Kwan Tarim believed every room had an owner. Sometimes it was the person whose name was written on the deed. Sometimes it was the person holding the voting shares. Sometimes it was the man with enough armed loyalty waiting downstairs to make paperwork feel decorative. In Seoul, Tarim preferred to be all three. His private elevator rose through the glass spine of Kwan Meridian Tower without stopping. 68 floors of polished wealth, hidden money, legal fronts, and quiet fear. Beneath the building's luxury brand lived port logistics companies, private security subsidiaries, development firms, hotel groups, offshore vehicles, and enough shadow contracts to make prosecutors age 10 years if they ever found the right drawer. Tarim stood inside the elevator, wearing an immaculate black Italian suit, one hand in his pocket, his face calm in the mirrored wall. Beside him stood his wife, Zyla Okonkwo. Cream designer suit. Natural curls pinned loosely at the back. Diamond studs small enough to look modest, but expensive enough to be recognized by women who knew the language of quiet money. She held a leather portfolio against her side and watched the floor numbers climb without asking where they were going. That was one of the things about Zyla that irritated him. She rarely asked obvious questions. Most people around Tarim performed interest, fear, or obedience. Zyla did none of those.
She observed.
She listened. She let silence gather around other people until they filled it with their own foolishness. 2 years of marriage had not changed that. To the world, she was Mrs. Kwan. To Tarim, she was an arrangement that had remained useful longer than expected. He had married her because her late godfather, Orizon Okonkwo, had once been tied to old development capital in Korea, Singapore, Dubai, and London. Orizon's name still opened doors even after death. His legal networks, foundation links, and private banking relationships had survived him like invisible architecture. Zyla had inherited enough social access to make her valuable, but not enough visible power to make her dangerous. That was what Tarim had believed. At first, the marriage worked exactly as intended. She appeared beside him at foundation dinners. She wore elegant gowns, spoke politely to ministers, remembered names after one introduction, and never embarrassed him by trying too hard. She was beautiful, composed, and useful in rooms where men with criminal money wanted to look legitimate. In exchange, Tarim gave her luxury. A penthouse overlooking the Han River, security,
Cars.
accounts,
Staff.
a wardrobe that could make envy look like admiration. A life so polished that women who pitted her in public secretly wondered what it would feel like to be pitted in diamonds. But he had never given her respect. Not because he hated her. That would have required attention. He simply placed her in the category where arrogant men placed quiet women, decorative, fortunate, dependent, and harmless. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor. Warm lights glowed over marble floors. Assistants bowed as they passed. Digital market displays moved across a black glass wall, showing stock prices, property valuations, shipping volume, and acquisition projections. Tarim's empire looked clean here. No blood.
No Alice. No whispers.
Just gold accents, polished stone, and men with legal titles covering illegal histories. Bay Ilian waited near the boardroom doors. Tarim's cousin was all smooth skin, sharp smile, and expensive nervous energy. As CFO, he dressed like a man who had read too many articles about power. Navy suit, silver tie clip, hair parted with mathematical precision. His eyes flicked to Zyla. Only for a second, but she noticed. She always noticed. Young, Ilian said, using the familiar title with public affection and private calculation. The board is seated. The merger packet is ready. Attorneys from Daysend Legal arrived 10 minutes ago. And the minority directors? Uncomfortable, but manageable. Ilian smiled. As always.
Tarim nodded.
This meeting was supposed to formalize what he had spent years building, the consolidation of 3 major corporate structures under one parent company. Luxury hotels,
Port logistics,
security services, development arms. Everything clean enough to show investors and useful enough to protect what could not be shown. Once signed, Tarim would have complete operational command. At least, that was what he thought. Ilian glanced again at Zyla's portfolio. Mrs. Kwan will be joining us? Taerim's mouth curved slightly. She wanted to watch how real power works. Zyla looked at him then. Not sharply. That would have been too generous. She simply met his eyes as if he had set something fragile on a ledge and did not know the window was open. I did say I would enjoy watching, she said. Ilian laughed politely. Taerim enjoyed the sound because he mistook it for agreement. They entered the boardroom. The room was made to intimidate people who thought wealth ended at money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul, the city glittering beneath a pale morning sky. A massive conference table stretched across the center like a dark river. Gold architectural lines framed the ceiling. Financial projections glowed on wall screens. Lawyers sat with sealed files. Executives sat with practiced seriousness. Directors arranged their faces into loyalty. Chairwoman Hong Mari sat near the far end. 70 years old, silver-haired, in a charcoal suit with a jade brooch at her collar. She had served on boards before most of these men learned how to lie in quarterly reports. Taerim respected her usefulness, but had never fully trusted her. That was wise.
He did not know why.
Zyla noticed Chairwoman Hong's eyes move briefly to her portfolio. Not to Taerim.
To Zyla.
Then away. A small thing. But small things open locked rooms. Taerim took his place near the head of the table. Zyla stood quietly near the window. Not seated. Not invited.
Not dismissed.
Just present. That was how the day began. A king entered his boardroom. His wife stood silently nearby. And no one in the room understood that the crown had already changed hands. Zyla Okonkwo learned early that quiet people heard the most expensive lies. As a child, she moved through cities the way other children moved through classrooms. Lagos first, where the air smelled of heat, fuel, pepper soup, and ambition. London next, gray and polished and cold enough to teach her that loneliness could wear a school uniform. Then Toronto, where snow fell outside apartment windows while her mother spread compliance files across the kitchen table and told Zyla never to trust a contract just because rich people smiled while signing it. Her mother, Amare Okonkwo, was not wealthy. She was precise. A compliance lawyer with tired eyes, beautiful handwriting, and a gift for spotting wrought under-polished language. She taught Zyla that corruption rarely introduced itself as corruption. It called itself opportunity, restructuring, family necessity, growth strategy, temporary adjustment. Zyla's father had disappeared when bad debts became louder than love. She remembered very little about him except expensive cologne and promises that arrived late. But she remembered Orizon. Orizon Okonkwo was not related by blood, though everyone called him her godfather because family friend was too small for what he became. He was a reclusive financier with homes he rarely slept in, passports he never discussed, and a laugh so dry it sounded like paper being folded. He noticed Zyla's mind when she was 16. She was sitting at his dining table in London while adults argued over a property fund. Someone had misplaced £9 million through what they kept calling a valuation irregularity. Zyla, bored and ignored, read the documents upside down from across the table. Then she said, "The money is not missing. It is waiting in the company no one is mentioning because its name changed twice." The room stopped. Orison looked at her over his glasses. "What did you say?" Zyla pointed to the appendix. That subsidiary used to be named Harrowbell, then Bellcross. Now HB Recovery. Same registration number. Different suit. The adult stared. Orison laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because she was right. After that he trained her. Not formally at first. He gave her annual reports and asked what felt wrong. He gave her trust structures and asked who was really in control. He gave her shell companies layered through islands, holding firms, family offices, and charitable foundations until she learned to follow ownership the way hunters follow tracks. When she was 19, he told her, "The loudest man in the room is rarely the owner. Look for the person everyone forgot to ask permission from." Zyla never forgot. Years later, when Orison was dying, he summoned her to a quiet private clinic in Geneva. His skin had gone gray beneath its deep brown tone. His hands were thinner, but his eyes were still sharp enough to cut ribbon. "There is a structure," he told her. "There are always structures with you." This one matters. He smiled faintly. You are sentimental when frightened. I'm not frightened. Liar.
She took his hand.
He told her about Ebongate Holdings, a private holding trust created decades earlier to hold silent controlling positions in companies too politically sensitive to own openly. Some were in shipping, some in hotels, some in infrastructure, some in security. Some had ties to Korea. The Kwon family believes they control certain assets, Orison said. Do they? They control the doors, not the land beneath the building. Zyla listened. He continued. When I am gone, beneficial control passes to you. Not immediately in public. The instructions require observation before activation. You must understand the internal rot before you reveal the hand. Why me? Because you can sit in a room full of arrogant men and let them underestimate you without needing to correct them too early. That was Orison's last gift and last burden. After his death, the documents came in layers. Trust memoranda, voting proxies, beneficial control certificates, corporate maps connecting Ebongate Holdings to Meridian Development assets in Seoul. Zyla studied them for months before understanding the full shape of what he had left. The legitimate spine of Kwon Taerim's empire did not belong to Taerim. It belonged to Ebongate, and Ebongate belonged to her. But power revealed too soon became a target. So she entered the Kwon world quietly. The marriage arrangement came dressed as strategy from both sides. Taerim wanted Orison's doors. Zyla wanted inside access to the Kwon corporate structure before activating control. Neither of them married for love, but only one of them understood the real contract. For 2 years, Zyla smiled when Taerim's associates called her lucky. She listened when his relatives discussed her as though beauty were her only asset. She sat through dinners where men explained finance to her while accidentally revealing which subsidiaries mattered most. She watched Ilion especially. Ilion made mistakes because he believed charm was a form of encryption. He was careful with senior men but careless around Zyla. He left folders open. He took calls near balconies. He spoke too freely after whiskey. He dismissed her as the kind of wife who understood flowers, not freight volume manipulation. By the second year, Zyla had mapped the theft. Fake land acquisition contracts, inflated consulting fees, ghost contractors, port development invoices routed through Macau. Construction reserves shifted through Dubai and returned as private debt instruments. Ilion was not stealing pocket money. He was hollowing the company from inside the walls. The merger meeting would bury it. Once Taerim signed the consolidation, the stolen money would dissolve into new structures. Old trails would become expensive fog, and Ilion would walk away richer while Taerim congratulated himself for becoming untouchable. The night before the board meeting, Zyla sat alone in Taerim's study. Not his private criminal study, the respectable one. Walnut shelves, rare books nobody opened, a painting chosen by a consultant.
À l'Hockey de Liqueur Cabinet.
A corporate ownership map displayed across her tablet. She marked 3 suspicious subsidiaries in red, then added a 4th. The door opened. Taerim entered in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled, tie gone, expression amused. Trying to understand my empire? Zyla did not look away from the screen.
No, she said.
Trying to understand why you think it is yours. He laughed. Actually laughed. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a drink. You have become bold lately. I have always been bold. You mistook quiet for absence. He looked at her then, the faintest flicker of irritation crossing his face. Tomorrow is important. Sit, observe, and do not mistake proximity for participation. Zyla closed the tablet. Is that advice for me? It is protection. From what? Rooms where people bite. She stood, smoothing her cream blouse. Then it is fortunate I learned to count teeth early. For a second, something like interest moved through his eyes. Then pride killed it. Good night, Mrs. Kwon. Good night, Mr. Kwon. He disliked when she called him that. She knew. When she left the study, she sent one encrypted message from her private phone. Proceed. Full activation at board threshold. Bring certified originals. Attorney Mireille Sang replied 3 minutes later. Documents ready.
Cheruma non notified.
Ebongate will speak tomorrow. Zyla placed the phone face down. then slept better than she had in months. Ilian had survived inside the Kwan family by smiling before anyone asked why he was in the room. He was not as feared as Tarim, not as brilliant in crisis, not as naturally commanding. But he had one gift that made him dangerous. He knew how to make powerful men feel clever while guiding them toward foolish decisions. By 8 the next morning, Ilian was already in his office overlooking the financial district, deleting nothing himself. That was what junior staff were for. A trembling accountant named Yun De-Sol stood before his desk, clutching a tablet to her chest. "These memos are part of the internal record," she said. Ilian adjusted his cufflinks. "They are drafts. They reference the Songwa land invoices. Drafts often reference many things. The auditors may ask why they disappeared." He smiled. "Then you will tell them the file cleanup was part of the pre-merger migration." De-Sol's face paled. "That is not true." "No," he said gently. "But it is employable." The threat was soft, effective. She lowered her eyes. After she left, Ilian opened a secure folder on his desktop. Fake acquisition agreements, shell contractor records, routing schedules, payment confirmations. It was all supposed to vanish beneath the merger. Then Zyla started asking questions. Not directly. That would have been easier. She asked like someone dusting furniture and noticing which drawer had fresh fingerprints. At a charity dinner, she asked why a development site in Incheon had 3 valuation changes in 1 quarter. During a family lunch, she asked whether Macau contractors usually billed in such round numbers. Once, in the penthouse elevator, she asked Ilian whether ghost companies preferred coastal addresses because the breeze helped them exist. He had laughed, then stopped laughing later. Zyla was not decorative. She was patient. That made her dangerous. At 10:30, Ilian found Tarim in the private antechamber outside the boardroom. Tarim was reviewing a final briefing while 2 assistants waited nearby. "Hyung," Ilian said carefully, "one concern." Tarim did not look up.
"Speak."
"Your wife's presence today." Tarim turned a page. "What about it?" "The minority directors are already nervous. Chairwoman Hong is old school. If Mrs. Kwan sits in, people may wonder whether she has influence in the vote." "She has no influence." "Of course. We know that." Tarim looked up now. Ilian chose the next words with surgical care. But perception matters. A boss cannot allow confusion around authority, especially not during consolidation. Especially not when some directors already whisper that foreign legal channels entered the company through Orizon Okonkwo's estate. There it was. Not an accusation. A suggestion. Tarim's pride did the rest. "Zyla is my wife," he said. "Exactly," Ilian replied. "Which is why any misunderstanding should be corrected publicly before the vote."
Tairimas mouth hardened.
Ilian lowered his voice. "Forgive me for saying it, but she has grown comfortable around documents she does not understand. If board members think she is more than a symbolic presence, it weakens the image you need today." Tarim looked through the glass wall toward the boardroom, where Zyla stood near the windows with her portfolio. She looked calm.
Too calm.
For a moment, he remembered what she had said the night before. "Trying to understand why you think it is yours."
His jaw tightened.
"She needs reminding." Ilian hid his satisfaction by bowing his head. "Better from you than from them." Across the boardroom, Zyla watched the conversation through the reflection in the window. She could not hear every word. She did not need to. Men like Ilian had body language that left fingerprints. Chairwoman Hong approached slowly, jade brooch catching the light. "Mrs. Kwan." Zyla turned. "Chairwoman." "It is a clear morning." "Very. Clear mornings are useful. They make it harder for people to claim they did not see what was in front of them." Zyla almost smiled. "Attorney Seng?" "On her way up." "And the board?" Hong Mari looked toward the seated directors. "Some remember Orizon. Fewer remember gratitude. But all remember voting rights." "That will do." From across the room, Ilian watched them speak. His stomach tightened. Why was Chairwoman Hong speaking to Zyla like that? Not politely, respectfully. Before he could move closer, the board secretary announced that the meeting would begin. Tarim entered like a man walking toward coronation. Executives stood. Lawyers straightened. Digital displays shifted to the merger presentation. The table reflected gold light, expensive pens, sealed files, and the faces of people who believed they knew where power sat. Zyla remained near the window. Ilian took his seat to Tarim's right. Chairwoman Hong sat opposite him. The first 15 minutes went as expected. Financial overview, consolidation benefits, legal efficiencies, asset protection, market expansion. Tarim spoke little, allowing lawyers and executives to dress his ambition in corporate language. Then Director Seo Mingyu, an older man with cautious eyes, looked toward Zyla. Before we proceed to voting authority, he said, "May I ask whether Mrs. Kwan is attending as an observer or in any official capacity?" The room held still. Ilian looked down to hide his smile. Tarim leaned back slightly. This was the moment pride had prepared for him. He glanced toward Zyla. She stood calm in cream, portfolio held at her side. For 1 second, something in her silence should have warned him. It did not.
Tarim smiled faintly.
"My wife," he said. A few men looked at him. He gestured dismissively, as if brushing dust from the table. "She is my wife on paper, nothing more." A small ripple moved through the room. Not loud laughter.
Worse.
Polite amusement. The kind that allowed cruelty to keep its cufflinks clean. Ilian's eyes gleamed. The junior executives avoided Zyla's face. Chairwoman Hong slowly removed her glasses. Zyla did not blink. She walked from the window to the conference table, her heels quiet against the marble floor. She placed her leather portfolio on the polished surface and opened it. The sound of the clasp releasing seemed louder than it should have been. Inside were share certificates, property files, voting proxies, trust activation papers, and certified ownership documents arranged with devastating neatness. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened. Attorney Mireille Seng entered. She was a slim woman in a charcoal suit, carrying a sealed legal case, and the expression of someone who had never lost sleep over powerful men being surprised. 2 clerks followed her. Every lawyer at the table turned. Chairwoman Hong stood first. Then Director Seo. Then 2 more directors. Then, slowly, the rest.
Tarim's smile faded.
Ilian stopped breathing. Zyla looked across the table at her husband.
Her voice was calm.
"You are correct, Mr. Kwan." She removed the first document from the portfolio and placed it before him. "On paper matters very much." The boardroom doors had never sounded so loud before. Attorney Mireille Seng entered with 2 clerks behind her, and the air inside Kwan Meridian Tower changed so completely that even the digital financial displays seemed to glow with caution. She did not rush. Powerful lawyers never did. She walked to the table carrying a sealed legal case in one hand and a narrow file in the other. Her charcoal suit was plain, almost severe, her hair pulled back, her expression calm enough to make every nervous man in the room feel childish. Tarim looked from her to Chairwoman Hong, then to the directors who had stood. "Why is everyone standing?" he asked. No one answered quickly. That was the first crack. In Tarim's world, silence usually meant fear of him. This silence was different. It did not bend toward him. It gathered around Zyla. Zyla stood at the conference table in her cream suit, one hand resting lightly beside the open portfolio. She looked exactly as she had looked when he mocked her. Beautiful, composed, unreadable. Only now, the room was reading her differently. Attorney Sang placed her sealed case on the table. "Good morning. I am Mireille Sang, counsel for Ebongate Holdings and its controlling beneficiary." Ilian's face tightened.
Tarim's katse farpered.
"This is a closed board meeting." "Yes," Mireille said. "That is why I am here." A few directors exchanged glances. Ilian sat forward. "This is irregular." Mireille did not look at him. Irregularity is precisely the topic of this meeting. Zyla removed a document from her portfolio and placed it on the polished table. The paper looked harmless. White sheets. Blue stamps.
Gold sal.
But every person in that room who understood law understood that paper could be more dangerous than knives. Director Seo Mingyu adjusted his glasses. "Are those originals?" "Certified originals," Mireille answered. Trust activation records, voting proxies, beneficial ownership confirmations, and updated control notices filed under the Eben Gate structure this morning.
Täirimäs malt hardret.
Eben Gate was a dormant holding vehicle. Zyla looked at him.
No.
Eben Gate was silent. A small murmur moved across the room. Chairwoman Hung finally spoke. The distinction is important. Tarim turned on her. You knew. Hong Mari did not flinch. I knew enough to wait for the lawful owner to speak. Lawful owner. The phrase entered the boardroom and took a seat at the head of the table. Ilion rose abruptly. This is absurd. Mrs. Kwan has no operational role, no executive history inside the corporation, no authority to interrupt a merger vote. Zyla turned one page. You are correct about my executive title.
Her voice was calm.
Almost gentle. Then she placed a share certificate in front of him. But ownership does not require a job description. Ilion went still. Mireille opened the legal case and began distributing documents to the board members. The clerks moved with precise efficiency, sliding official copies across the table to directors, lawyers, and the corporate secretary. Tarim watched the papers travel. For years, documents had moved toward him for signature, approval, authorization. Now they moved past him, around him, beyond him. He looked at Zyla. What is this? She answered without satisfaction. The reason this room was never yours alone. The board's secretary read quickly, face losing color by the second. Director Seo whispered, 61%. Another director repeated it, louder this time. Eben Gate holds 61% voting control through the parent structure. The room shifted again. Not dramatically. Worse. Professionally. Executives who had angled their chairs toward Tarim all morning began turning toward Zyla. Lawyers who had waited for Tarim's approval now looked to Mireille Sang. Even the junior staff near the wall seemed to understand that gravity had changed. Tarim remained standing near the head of the table, but for the first time in his own skyscraper, he looked like a man standing in someone else's meeting. Ilion's voice rose. This could be challenged. Mireille opened another file. You may try. Her tone suggested she would enjoy billing the attempt. Tarim ignored the lawyer and focused on Zyla. You sat beside me for 2 years and said nothing. Zyla's eyes did not soften. You stood beside me for 2 years and asked nothing. The sentence landed clean. No one smiled. No one dared. Tarim's face tightened with humiliation he would rather have called anger. I gave you everything. Zyla looked around the boardroom. Marble. Gold.
Glass.
Men who had laughed when he reduced her to paper.
No, she said.
You gave me luxury and mistook it for dignity. Ilion cut in quickly, sensing danger moving away from Zyla and toward him. This is emotional manipulation. She married into the family to steal control. Zyla finally looked at him fully. For the first time that morning, Ilion wished she would look away. I married into the family, she said, because Orzen Okonkwo's final instructions required observation before activation. He did not trust the Kwan structure. As it turns out, he was generous to doubt it. Tarim's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Zyla closed her portfolio softly. It means this meeting was never only about ownership. She reached into the file and removed a second stack of documents. It is also about theft. Ilion's face went blank. That blankness convicted him more quickly than panic would have. Zyla placed the audit summary on the table. Songhua land contracts.
Macau consulting accounts.
Dubai contractor advances. Ghost invoices under 3 development subsidiaries. $28 million moved over 14 months. The silence became absolute. Ilion laughed once. You have no idea what those documents mean. Zyla tilted her head slightly. That is what you were counting on. Mireille Sang slid another document toward the corporate council. An emergency motion has been prepared. The board will review immediately. Tarim stared at Ilion now. Not as a cousin. As a problem. Ilion swallowed. Zyla looked at Tarim and said quietly, You called me your wife on paper, nothing more. So I brought paper. Then she turned to the board. Shall we begin? The first vote did not remove Tarim. That would have been too crude. Zyla had no interest in theatrical revenge. She had watched enough arrogant people destroy themselves by overreaching. The cleaner cut was always better. The first vote recognized Ebongate Holdings as the controlling shareholder of Meridian Quan Consolidated and its associated parent entities. It passed 9-2. The second vote recognized Zyla Okonkwo as controlling beneficiary and acting voting authority under the trust structure. It passed 8-3. The third vote postponed the merger. That one hurt Tarim visibly. Not because he loved the merger, but because postponement meant the room had accepted someone else's authority over his timing. He leaned forward with both hands on the table. This consolidation has been in motion for 11 months. Zyla nodded. Long enough for theft to hide inside it. Ilian slammed his palm onto the table. Enough. Are we really allowing a woman with no operational role to accuse the CFO based on decorative paperwork? Zyla did not raise her voice. Decorative paperwork bought this building. A director coughed into his hand. Ilian pointed toward her. She is using the marriage. That is all this is. She failed as a wife, so now she wants to play owner. For the first time, Tarim looked uncomfortable. Not protective. Not yet. But aware that Ilian's words had gone too far in a room that no longer belonged to him. Zyla looked at her husband, then back at Ilian. I did not fail as a wife. I was never interviewed for the position properly. The line cut through the room with quiet elegance. Even Chairwoman Hong's mouth moved as if suppressing approval. Zyla opened the audit file. Now, Mr. Bay, would you like to explain why a rural development parcel valued at $6 million was purchased through a contractor for $14 million, then transferred twice through connected companies before the difference appeared in a Dubai account tied to your private foundation? Ilian's skin lost warmth. That is privileged corporate strategy. No, Mireille Sang said. That is a sentence people say before prosecutors become interested. The corporate counsel leaned toward Tarim. Chairman, we should pause. Zyla corrected him. Mr. Quan is not chairing this portion. The counsel blinked. Zyla turned to Chairwoman Hong. Madam Chairwoman.
On Mari Satstrater.
Proceed. The word shifted history. Tarim heard it. Everyone heard it. For years, the people in this room had listened to Tarim's silence as command. Now they were taking direction from the woman he had dismissed less than 30 minutes earlier. Zyla continued with the precision of someone who had bled privately long enough to speak publicly without trembling. 3 ghost contractors were created 18 months ago. Each received pre-development consulting fees. 2 have no staff. 1 is registered to a building that burned down 6 years ago. Payment approvals were routed through CFO authorization. Supporting memos were deleted during pre-merger migration at 8:12 this morning. Ilian looked toward the junior accountant seated near the wall. Yun Desul stared at the table, pale and shaking. Zyla noticed. Miss Yun, she said gently. The young accountant looked up. You are not being accused. You are being asked whether you were instructed to delete internal memos this morning. Ilian hissed. Do not answer. Chairwoman Hong looked at him. You are not chairing either. Yun's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. I was told they were drafts. I was told to mark the deletion as migration cleanup. By whom? Zyla asked. Yun looked at Ilian. No one needed her to say it, but she did. Mr. Bay. Ilian stood so abruptly his chair struck the floor behind him. This is a setup. Zyla's expression remained calm. It is an audit. You use my own staff against me. You use them first. Tarim finally spoke, voice low. Ilian. The cousin turned toward him, desperate now. Hyung, listen to me. She is dividing us. That is what outsiders do. She came into the family with Orizin's ghosts and now she is turning the board against your blood. This was the real vote, not the board's.
His.
Would he choose blood because it was familiar, or truth because it was visible? Did you steal from the company? Ilian looked offended. How can you ask me that? Because she has documents and you have volume. The words landed hard. Ilian's face changed. He had expected Tarim's pride to defend him automatically. He had miscalculated the one thing more dangerous than Tarim's arrogance, his hatred of being made a fool. Mireille Sang distributed the emergency resolutions. Under Eben Gates' activated control rights and pending board approval, the following motions are proposed. Suspension of Bay Ilian as CFO. Immediate external forensic audit. Cancellation of today's merger vote. Temporary restriction on unilateral signing authority for all executives connected to the consolidation. The last line turned every eye toward Tarim. He stared at Zyla. You are restricting me? Temporarily, she said. You think I will accept that?
No, she said.
I think you will hate it. But I also think you understand survival better than pride. His eyes flashed. She stepped closer, lowering her voice enough that the room still heard, but understood the words were for him. You have one clean choice. Help expose the theft and keep a seat in the legitimate company, or defend your cousin and lose everything clean enough to survive daylight. Tarim looked at her. For the first time since he had known her, he looked properly. Not at the cream suit. Not at the beauty. Not at the wife-shaped role he had placed her inside. At the mind that had moved through his empire unseen. At the patience that had let him underestimate her. At the woman who had not stolen his company, but revealed that he had never fully understood it. He looked at Ilian, then at the documents, then back at Zyla. What else did you find? Ilian made a small sound. Zyla held Tarim's gaze. Enough to save what you thought you owned. The board voted. Ilian was suspended. The merger was cancelled. The audit was approved. And Quan Tarim, who had entered the room as the unquestioned owner of everything, remained standing beside the head of the table while his wife signed the first resolution. Not as Mrs. Quan, as Zyla Okonkwo, controlling beneficiary of Eben Gate Holdings, the owner he had laughed at. Bay Ilian did not leave quietly. Men who stole in silence often protested loudly when found. He paced near the window while security waited by the door, his face flushed, his tie slightly crooked now. The elegant CFO had begun to peel, and beneath him stood the frightened cousin who had borrowed too much confidence from other people's fear. You cannot remove me without a full family review, he snapped. Chairwoman Hong closed the resolution folder. The corporation is not your family dinner table. Ilian pointed at Zyla. She has poisoned all of you. Zyla looked almost bored. If truth poisons a room, the room was already sick. Mireille Sang slid the final suspension notice across the table. Mr. Bay, you will surrender company devices, access cards, signing tokens, and encrypted drives before leaving the floor. He laughed. Do you know who I am? Zyla answered before anyone else.
Yes.
That has been the difficulty. A few executives looked down. Tarim stood near the head of the table, silent. His humiliation had become something colder, more useful. He was no longer trying to win the room back by force. He was watching the architecture of betrayal expose itself beam by beam. Ilian turned to him again.
Hyung.
Are you going to let her do this? After everything? After all the years I stood beside you? Tarim's face hardened. You stood beside me because the accounts were easier to reach from there. Ilian flinched. Then anger took over. You think she is saving you? She is taking you apart. Today's signing authority, tomorrow the hotels, then the ports, then the security firms. She will leave you with nothing but your name. Zyla closed one folder. Your fear is not evidence. No, but your marriage is, Ilian snapped. You came in through his bed, and now you pretend it was business. The room went deadly still. Tarim moved before he seemed to decide to. He crossed the space between them and struck Ilian across the face with the back of his hand. Not hard enough to break bone. Hard enough to end the sentence. Ilian stumbled against the table, breathing fast, one hand to his cheek. Tarim's voice was low. Speak about my wife like that again, and you will need more than a lawyer. Zyla did not thank him. That would have made the moment too simple. Instead, she looked at Tarim with an expression he could not read. Maybe disappointment. Maybe recognition that even protection could arrive late and still carry the old shape of possession.
Mireille Sang klirrte à l'oreille.
Security. 2 guards stepped forward. Ilian looked around the room, expecting someone to intervene. Nobody did. That was how power ended for men like him. Not with enemies cheering. With allies discovering silence was safer. As he was escorted out, Ilian stopped at the door and turned back. You think this ends here? He said. Zyla met his eyes.
No.
I think this is the first honest thing you have said today. The doors closed behind him. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Chairwoman Hong spoke. The board recognizes Ms. Okonkwo as acting control authority for all matters related to the audit and restructuring. Mr. Kwon will retain advisory operational input, but will not exercise unilateral signing authority until review completion. Tae-rim's face gave nothing away, but his hand tightened once at his side. Advisory. The word was a small humiliation with legal teeth. Zyla gathered her documents. Staff below director level are not to be punished for compliance under pressure. Anyone who cooperates with the audit receives counsel. Anyone who destroys records after this moment receives prosecutors. Director CO nodded. Understood. She turned to the corporate counsel. All external communications will describe this as a governance review and merger delay. No accusations until evidence is secured. Yes, Ms. Okonkwo. Ms. Okonkwo, not Mrs. Kwon. Tae-rim heard it.
So, did she?
The meeting dissolved slowly. Directors left in clusters, whispering not about Tae-rim's anger, but Zyla's control. Executives who once bowed to him now approached her with careful respect. Lawyers handed documents to Mireille, not Iliun's empty chair. At last, only Tae-rim and Zyla remained near the table. Seoul glittered beyond the windows, bright and indifferent. He looked at the ownership documents, still resting before her. How long? He asked. She did not pretend not to understand. How long have I known? Since before the wedding. His eyes darkened. You married me knowing you controlled the company. Yes. His laugh was quiet and bitter. So, I was useful. Zyla slipped the documents into her portfolio. Yes. The honesty struck harder than denial would have. Then she added, as I was to you. He had no answer. She stepped toward the door. Do not make yourself the only betrayed person in a room where you built the marriage on strategy. He turned sharply. And what did you build it on? She paused. For the first time that day, her calm thinned enough to show something tired underneath. Observation, she said. And eventually disappointment. The word remained after she left. Tae-rim stood alone in the boardroom where he had laughed at his wife on paper. Nothing more. He looked at the head of a table. Then at the chair where Zyla had signed his authority into limitation. For the first time, he understood the insult had not made her smaller. It had only made his ignorance public. And somewhere beneath the humiliation, beneath the anger, beneath the instinct to reclaim control, another realization began to form. The woman he had dismissed had not destroyed his empire. She had found the man hollowing it out.
She had stopped a theft he had missed.
She had saved the cleanest part of his power from the family he trusted. Tae-rim looked out over Seoul. In the reflection of the glass, he saw himself clearly enough to hate it. A man who had owned rooms his whole life, and had never learned how to recognize the person who owned the ground beneath them. The penthouse felt different after the boardroom. The marble was still black. The windows still held Seoul in glittering pieces. The private bar still displayed bottles old enough to have histories, and the river still cut through the city below like silver under glass. But Kwon Tae-rim entered that night like a man returning to a palace after learning the throne had been rented. Zyla was already there. That irritated him more than it should have. She sat at the long dining table in the cream suit she had worn to destroy him, her earrings removed, her curls loose now around her shoulders, a cup of tea beside her, documents spread in quiet order across the surface.
No champagne. No celebration. No smile.
That somehow felt worse than gloating. Tae-rim dismissed the guards with one look. The doors closed behind them, leaving the two of them alone above Seoul. For a while, only the city spoke. Then he said, You enjoyed that. Zyla turned a page.
No.
You expect me to believe that? I expect nothing from you tonight. He laughed under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Of course. The owner has no expectations.
She looked up then. Calm.
Tired. Dangerously calm. If I wanted to humiliate you, Tae-rim, I would have done it 2 years ago. You waited for an audience.
No, she said.
I waited for proof. He walked toward the bar and poured whiskey with more force than necessary. The liquid struck crystal. He did not drink immediately. You deceived me. Zyla closed the folder slowly. You married me for access to Orizin's network. Do not pretend betrayal began when I learned how to read contracts better than you.
His jaw tightened.
That was different.
How?
I was clear about what the marriage was. So was I. You simply never asked me to explain my side of it. He turned, glass in hand. You lived in my house. I lived in a residence assigned to your wife. I protected you. You displayed me. His eyes flashed. You had everything. Zyla stood. For the first time, emotion entered her voice, not loud, not broken, but sharpened by 2 years of being mistaken for furniture. I had clothes chosen by stylists, cars arranged by assistants, security that followed me because I belonged to you, not because anyone wondered what I wanted. I had a bedroom beside yours and a life beside yours, and still you never once asked what I was thinking unless it affected a dinner schedule. Tarim looked away. She stepped closer. You gave me luxury and called it care. You gave me your name and called it honor. You gave me silence and expected gratitude. He turned back. And you gave me a lie. Yes, she said. I did. The honesty stopped him. Zyla held his gaze. I entered this marriage with a purpose. I will not pretend otherwise. Orizin's instructions required observation from inside the Quan structure. I knew Ebon Gate mattered. I knew your company was not what you believed it was. I knew there was rot somewhere. And me, he asked, voice lower now. Was I just part of the structure? For the first time, she did not answer quickly. That hurt him more than the documents. At first, she said. The room went quiet. He swallowed once. And after? After, I waited. For what? For you to become curious. Her voice softened, which made it more painful. For you to ask one real question. For you to notice that I was not quiet because I had nothing to say. For you to wonder why Orizin trusted me. For you to see me as anything other than the beautiful clause in a contract. Tarim stared at her. Zyla looked down at the table, then back at him. My patience was real. My disappointment was real. The marriage? You decided what it was before I was allowed to. He set the whiskey down untouched. Was any of it real? She looked toward the windows, where their reflections stood beside each other, but did not touch. I do not know what to call something that was never given room to breathe. That answer was worse than no. She gathered her documents. Ilion will not stop. Men like him become most dangerous after public exposure. He will try to make me look like the threat, so you forget he was the thief. I know my cousin. No, Zyla said quietly. You knew his usefulness. That is not the same thing. She walked toward the hallway. Tarim spoke before she reached it. Zyla.
She stopped.
He realized, with a strange sense of shame, how rarely he used her name when no one was listening. She turned halfway. He wanted to say he was sorry. The words were there, but pride, old and ugly, held them hostage. So he said, be careful. Her face changed, not softened, not exactly, but something in her eyes acknowledged the attempt. I always am. After she left, Tarim stood alone in the penthouse without a king. For the first time since he was young, the silence did not obey him. Bey Ilion began his revenge before midnight. By morning, the rumors had already entered the bloodstream of Seoul's underworld. Zyla Okonkwo was the real owner. Zyla Okonkwo had stripped Tarim's signing power. Zyla Okonkwo controlled the legitimate companies that cleaned the dirty money, housed the influence, and protected the doors between business and crime. By noon, rivals who had feared Tarim began asking different questions. Not whether he could be attacked, whether she could be used. The first threat arrived at Zyla's private office inside Ebon Gate's temporary Seoul suite. It came wrapped in a courier envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of her leaving the tower. A red line drawn across her face. No note. None was needed. Attorney Mireille Sang wanted her moved immediately to a secure location. Chairwoman Hong wanted the board informed. Tarim wanted the city locked down. Zyla wanted the audit completed. No, Tarim said, standing in her office while rain streaked down the windows behind him. You will not sit here waiting for another envelope. Zyla continued reading a report. I am not waiting. I am working. You are being targeted. I was being targeted when everyone thought I was decorative. At least now they know I am difficult to move. That is not funny. I was not joking. He stepped closer to the desk. My world is not a corporate disagreement. She looked up. Your world became my legal problem the day your family built clean companies over dirty assumptions. The words should have angered him. Instead, he found himself watching her hands move over the report. Steady, precise, unafraid in a way that was not foolish. She had fear. He could see it now. She simply refused to make fear her employer. That was different from the men around him. Most men performed courage for witnesses. Zyla used it quietly like a tool. Over the next days, Tarim began seeing what he had ignored for 2 years. Zyla in a conference room with frightened staff, telling junior accountants they would receive counsel if they cooperated. Zyla questioning logistics managers until their rehearsed answers fell apart. Zyla correcting lawyers without raising her voice. Zyla pausing a meeting because an assistant looked close to tears, then resuming with twice the focus. She did not rule like him. She did not need the room afraid. She needed it honest. That was more difficult. One evening, Tarim found her in the archive room surrounded by boxes of contracts. You have not slept, he said. Neither have you. I am accustomed to it. So am I. He frowned. Because of me? Zyla signed a document, then set the pen down. Not everything is about you. The sentence should have insulted him. Instead, it relieved him. For once, someone was not arranging her life around his importance. A security alert buzzed on his phone. One of Ilion's associates had been seen near the home of Yoon De-sol, the junior accountant who testified. Tarim's face hardened. Zyla noticed. What happened? Nothing you need to handle.
Tarim.
He looked at her. She did not say husband. She said his name like a demand for adulthood. He handed her the phone. She read it and stood immediately. Send protection to Yoon. Already done. She looked surprised. He glanced away. And to her mother's apartment. And to her younger brother's school. Zyla studied him. You did that without telling me. I did not do it for applause. For a moment, something in the room shifted. Not forgiveness. Not romance. Respect noticing the door. Zyla nodded once. Thank you. Tarim did not know what to do with gratitude that was not obedience. So he only said, Ilion is forcing escalation.
No, Zyla replied.
He is forcing visibility. Her eyes sharpened. And that is where he will lose. The investor briefing was supposed to be boring. That was the genius of it. A clean hotel conference hall. Press at the back. Analysts in the middle rows. Board members seated in controlled formation.
No shouting.
No dramatic police raid.
No visible panic.
Just a company choosing transparency before scandal could choose it for them. Zyla stood at the podium in a black tailored dress, her natural curls swept over one shoulder, a silver pin at her collar. Tarim sat in the first row, expression unreadable. For once, he was not the center of the room. He was learning the difficulty of it. Zyla began with the merger delay, then governance review, then leadership restructuring. Her voice was smooth, professional, impossible to interrupt. Meridian Quan Consolidated has identified irregularities in certain development payments, land acquisition contracts, and third-party consulting structures. We have initiated an external forensic audit and recovery process.
Cameras clicked.
Reporters leaned forward. Ilion entered 10 minutes late. That was his mistake. He wanted the room to see him arrive as a man wrongfully accused. Instead, he looked like a man chasing a train already leaving. He stood near the aisle and raised his voice. This briefing is incomplete. Every camera turned. Zyla looked at him calmly. Mr. Bay, you were invited through counsel. I will not let you destroy my name with controlled half-truths. Then full truth will be refreshing. A murmur moved through the room. Ilion pointed toward Tarim. Ask him. Ask Chairman Quan what he knew. Ask how money moved for years under his command. Ask whether I could approve anything without the family had benefiting. The room shifted. This was the blade Ilion had saved. If he fell, he would try to drag Tarim down by the collar. All eyes turned to Tarim. Zyla did not look back at him. She gave him the dignity of making his own choice.
Tairim stood.
For years, standing had been enough to silence rooms. This time, he had to earn the silence that followed. I failed to see corruption inside my own structure, he said. The words cost him. Zyla heard it. So did everyone else. I trusted blood where I should have demanded proof. I trusted familiarity where I should have required competence. That failure is mine. Ilian's face twisted. Do not pretend you are innocent. I am not pretending anything, Tarim said. I am saying you stole from the company and hid behind my arrogance. The room went still. Then Tarim turned slightly toward Zyla. Mrs. Kwan saw what I did not. Zyla's expression did not change, but something in her chest tightened. It was not enough, but it was not nothing. Mireille Sang took over from there. She presented enough evidence to end Ilian's career without exposing everything that would burn the legitimate structure down with him. Inflated contracts, ghost contractors, offshore accounts, deleted memos recovered from backups, witness statements protected under counsel.
Precise.
Classy. Devastating. By the time she finished, Ilian was no longer performing outrage. He was sweating through his collar. Security approached. This time, no one waited for Tarim to approve it. Ilian looked at him one last time. You choose her over family? Tarim's answer came, without hesitation. I choose the person who told the truth. Ilian was removed. The cameras captured everything. By evening, Bay Ilian's name was everywhere. By morning, prosecutors had enough to begin formal action. By the next week, executives who once feared him began describing him as isolated, troubling, and never fully trusted. Powerful people had many talents. Abandoning the fallen was their oldest. Late that night, Tarim found Zyla in the empty briefing room, gathering her notes. You were careful, he said. She did not look up. That was the point. You could have destroyed more. Yes. Why didn't you? She placed the final folder into her bag. Because I am not Ilian. He nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, he asked, Is it too late to start again? Zyla finally looked at him. The old Tarim would have expected forgiveness because he asked beautifully. This Tarim, she noticed, looked like he feared the answer. Good. Fear meant he understood something could be lost. You may start, she said, by learning my name when you say wife. He absorbed the correction, then bowed his head slightly.
Zyla.
She walked past him toward the door. This time, he did not follow until she looked back and allowed it. Months changed the company faster than they changed the marriage. Meridian became cleaner, sharper, less theatrical. Zyla cut 3 vanity projects, replaced 2 directors, restructured the port development unit, and created a whistleblower office no one could quietly bury under a cousin's authority again. People learned quickly. When Zyla entered a room, they stood because they respected control, not because they feared punishment. Tarim remained powerful, but not untouchable. That was the difference. At public events, he stopped introducing her as my wife, with that old possessive laziness. The first time he corrected himself, Zyla heard it. This is my wife. He began at a cultural finance dinner, then paused. This is Zyla Okonkwo, chair of Ebongate and controlling partner of Meridian. The minister receiving them blinked, recalibrated, and bowed to her properly. Zyla said nothing, but later, in the car, she looked out the window and said, That was better. Tarim almost smiled. Better is not praise.
It is when I say it. He accepted that.
He had learned to accept many things. That listening did not weaken him. That asking questions did not make him small. That silence from Zyla did not mean emptiness. Sometimes it meant she was deciding whether he had earned the next truth. One evening, he asked her to meet him in the old boardroom. The same one. The city glittered beyond the glass. The conference table had been cleared.
No directors. No lawyers.
No documents stacked like weapons. Only one folder waited at the center. Zyla entered in a deep green suit, her hair loose, her expression careful. If this is symbolic, I may leave. It is legal. That is not always better. He accepted the hit without defense. She opened the folder. A revised marital agreement.
Clean.
Precise. Generous. It removed every clause built around strategic access. It confirmed her full independence, her ownership rights, her personal assets, and her freedom to dissolve the marriage without challenge, delay, retaliation, or public pressure. At the bottom, Tarim had already signed. Zyla read every page. He waited. For once, he did not rush the silence. Finally, she said, "This gives me the right to leave with no fight." "Yes." "And keep what is already mine." "Yes." "And you signed before knowing what I would choose." "Yes." She looked up.
Why?
"Because the marriage was dead when it was only paper," he said. "If anything real begins, it cannot begin with me holding the exit shut." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she closed the folder. Love cannot grow where respect is absent. "I know. Do you?" "I am learning." Her eyes held his. "Then stop asking to be taught and start paying attention." He nodded.
No dramatic kiss. No instant forgiveness.
No music swelling over the skyline. Just two people standing in the room where he had once made her small and where she had shown him the size of his mistake. Weeks later, at a board event, a director from Singapore made the old error. "Will Mrs. Kwan be attending as your wife?" Tarim answered before Zyla could speak.
No.
The director stiffened. Tarim turned toward Zyla as she entered the hall. "She is not attending as my wife. I am attending as her partner." The room went quiet. Zyla stopped for half a second. Then she smiled.
Small.
Real. Earned. Tarim walked toward her, not ahead of her, not pulling her into a shadow, but meeting her at the center of the room. On paper, she had owned everything from the beginning. The buildings, the shares, the voting rights, the legal ground beneath his empire. But in the end, the only thing she did not inherit was the one thing he finally had to earn.
Her respect.